Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this December 26th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's Pacific time on First Amendment. They also play the show at 11 a.m. Monday through Friday, and if you can't get it there, go to my long-standing website at arcticbeacon.com, and you can get shows going back over a decade and what I call the Vatican-led New World Order. Okay, hope everybody had a very, very Merry Christmas. And now this whole week, the media and everybody else is going to be reminiscing about the year 2016. We do it every year. We do it after 2015. I can remember doing it back in 1970. And, everything seems to always get a little worse. Never seems to get better. We're $20 trillion in debt as a country. Relationships in the Middle East are completely gone haywire. Now, Obama has been probably the worst president we've ever had in the history of this country. And I don't care if he's black, blue, green, or yellow. The man has literally taken apart Christianity in the Middle East with his policies in Syria. Christians are being wiped off the face of the map in Africa and the Middle East, and restrictions here on God in the schools is still at an all-time low. With Trump becoming president, everybody's looking forward to a panacea, a new world. Everything's going to get better. We're all going around saying Merry Christmas. But I have a different take on it. Now, of course, anybody can be better than Barack Obama when you start looking at his policies. My goodness, he might as well be the president of Iran. He gave them billions and billions of dollars, sets them on a pace for nuclear weapons, destabilizes Syria, where over 500,000 people have been killed, when he could have took a stance and ended that quickly. But he's really not in charge, folks. This is an orchestrated effort by the Vatican and the Jesuit order, their policy to first destabilize Europe, to wipe off the earth all these Christians, Jews, and any group that's going to stand in the way of this one world government, and using radical Islam as their tool. Like I said, they've done it in the past. They did it back when they created Muhammad and when they created Islam. So what do we have here? We have, now looking back in 2016, a nightmare to face in the future. And where is it going to take us? What do they have planned next? Well, you all have your ideas. It could be an economic collapse. It could be World War III. It could be, the use of HAARP and all their ways of weather control. And it could be just one big mess. So that's what's happening. And now the point I want to make in this show today, now let's first look at, Obama's out. The Jesuits are still in. They don't get elected, folks. These guys are there forever. They are there from the beginning to the end. I'm telling you this. And they have been creating chaos ever since. Well, the Jesuits were formed in the 1500s, so it's been ever since then they've been going wild on Christianity in any way possible. And in their Jesuit oath, they even say, hey, it's okay to kill anybody who doesn't follow the Pope. The ends justifies the means. So now, as we head into the end of this year, it appears all over the world that the Jesuits are throwing people a bone. They're getting, it seems like everybody's getting this opportunity to fight against globalism. Brexit, first example. We had Renzi overthrown in Italy. Second example, we have this huge migration of refugees. Outside of the 500,000 Syrians that have been killed, millions are flowing, and millions from the Middle East and Somalia and Africa are flowing into Europe, and that's the policies of the Jesuits and Merkel and all the rest of the UN and the EU, the United States. And now that they've had, they've pushed Syria to the limit, they've destroyed Aleppo. If you look at what they did to that city, it looks like Nazi Germany. It's exactly what it is. They took a bustling city in Syria and turned it into rubble. Is that what they're going to do here? Well, who knows what they have planned, but you know it's not going to be good. So they're throwing bones now out to people, giving them this hope. In Europe, everybody's going, well, look at what's happening in Brexit. We're going to get nationalism back on the front stage. We got Italy now thinking the same way, France, Germany, and as you go all the way up. Well, has their infiltration been pretty successful so far? Yeah. We've talked about all the radical Muslim extremists in countries that are creating Sharia law. They've gotten inside the walls of America and Europe. And now we have this huge ISIS created by the Vatican. You know what ISIS is. ISIS, let's get right down to it. Why did they name it ISIS? ISIS is a goddess that they worship. You know, the obelisks in Rome, in Italy, in London, and right in front of your Capitol building, where most people walk around blind saying that represents peace and freedom. That doesn't represent peace. It's an occult symbol, if you look back. And it's an ISIS worship obelisk. They're shoving it right in your face. And how many people really get it? You can talk to the cows come home about Scripture. You can talk to the cows come home about all this stuff. You can go back to history and lay out a plan that would shock the conscience of people. You can present the greatest facts in the world regarding the Vatican involvement in all this chaos. And guess what? The media will not cover it. The alternative media is dedicated now by the Jesuits to all these crazy stories. You know, you look at the hits on YouTube. It's depressing. The stories that should be getting millions of hits get few, whether they control it or not. People just aren't interested in the hard truth. And they never will be until they realize that it comes from somewhere you've never even believed before. And all of this stuff going on in Israel now, let's look at that for a second. Don't you think the Knesset, Netanyahu, and all these people work for the Vatican as well? We know that. We know the people of the Jews are being led just like we are in America. The Knesset is no different than the United States Congress. And so I thought today I would try to bring up one subject that could inspire even the biggest critic, the biggest doubter. And in the meantime, those of you who caught on should look into this story. It has to do with drug trafficking, which is a killer all over the world, and it's a moneymaker for the powers that be. And if you think that everything's on the level, that the left in our country has now given way to the right and Donald Trump, and everything is going to be different now, I'm going to give you one example why it isn't, and why we are being buffaloed, and why we are being led by the string right to hell and back. And I'm telling you something. This story never gets attention. And the reason it doesn't get attention is because too many people make a lot of money with it. And it goes right to Italy and Rome. Drug trafficking. Now, how come we get a presidential candidate like Bill Clinton, a president, Bill Clinton, and then his wife, who've been around for 30 years, the highest levels of our government. And they've been connected to so many ties to Mena, Arkansas, and drug trafficking and deaths and murder, but no one covers it in the mainstream. You know why? Because they're told not to. These are the kind of people they want in office, because they're involved with the connection to the Vatican, and the Vatican controls who's in our system. All you have to do is start doing a check on all of their connections. And so, let's fast forward now. We know all of the problems if you started looking into drug trafficking and how it started maybe in the big... Let's go back a little bit and figure this out. And then I'm going to refer to a couple books and one movie you need to look at. But if we go way back to the Cold War, right after World War II, if you do your history, you will see this whole idea of drug trafficking was conceived with Pope Pius XII, as well as top CIA, or at that time OSS, which morphed into the CIA officials. And what was happening is they needed to create chaos and war. They needed to create rebel groups to fight. Well, they also created communism, so you got to get this into your head. None of these people, Stalin, if you look into his history, he was trained by Jesuits. Stalin was put into power by a man that is the head of started the School of Foreign Service in Georgetown. Yes, a priest. And how many times have I brought up his name? And it just goes over, no one talks about it. The Jesuit priest, and he was a CIA agent sent over to make sure Stalin got into power. And make sure, and the Jesuit general at the time, which was from Poland, he ordered the death of Lenin. And guess what happened after that? Look at how many people were killed in Russia. And then they were also with Hitler. So why the hell do you think it would stop after? So now, since they created communism, and you can go to the Paraguay tests when the Jesuits were testing out communism in Paraguay. And is that any, I heard Bush bought a whole bunch of property there as well. So anyway, this thing goes so deep. And you think it's just going to end with one election? No. Okay, we're all going to try to carve out some advantages here. And that's natural. That's human nature. So am I. I'm looking for a few advantages with what's happening here. But is it a panacea that's going to happen? No. They've got us so dug deep into problems right now. I don't know how you can get out of it. Look at what they've done. Not only have they created this kind of Trojan horse where we got terrorist groups that they've created coming at us from all angles. And not only that, but while on Obama's watch, he purposely did not put money into our military while China and Russia were rebuilding their nuclear stockpiles. And now Iran's on a path, North Korea. Isn't this interesting? How they're setting up America? Not what? Trump now, he's just the opposite. I'm going to build a military. I'm going to do all these things. And we're going to fight back. Now, what's going to happen here? This is it's not coincidence that Obama came in and destroyed. If you look at his record, and how could people not see it? The guy might as well be the president of Iran, is what I'm saying. It's just amazing. But the Jesuits now know they need to throw a bone to everybody here. And what they're going to do is, I think, create more chaos. So, here we go. What I was saying, so Obama's not... So we're going back to figure out, because we're using the story of drug trafficking to show you people who are doubters, who don't get this story, that if you hang on to this story, you'll take you to many, many others, and hopefully it'll take you back to what I think is the most important story. And that is how from the beginning of time, the Vatican has been there to destroy Christ. And they're doing it to this day. And you will get to the bottom line that they worship Lucifer. It's very obvious. All you got to do is look at their last Easter ceremony. Well, go to the one in 2015. It might have been in 16 as well, when they talk in Latin. And if you translate it, they were worshiping Lucifer at this Easter ceremony. They even said it, Lucifer will never be defeated. And they even said Christ is his son. What? These people are in, really, to sit there and to think that I grew up in this religion, and to think that they deceived me for all those years. It's enough to make your head spin. But anyway, so I wanted to take one story. So I'm going to give you just a general overview, because this is, if you go back to Wild Bill Donovan and all those CIA guys, when they were looking for ways to make money and support these rebel groups, now they were going to fight. This is how they created all that strife in South America and in Central America and all over the globe, what they do. How many countries have we destabilized? How many people have we killed? We even killed we even killed the Cambodian leader. Well, you know that story. And you know that tells you how the CIA operates when you go back and just look up a guy by the name of Dangerous Dan Marvin. Passed away. Dan was a Green Beret on my show many times. He wrote a book called The Expendable Elite, and it tells you what the CIA was all about in Vietnam. Unbelievable stories. Go to that. I don't have time for it today. I'll hit it another time. You can go back to my old shows on that. So what they had, when they go into a country, they got to have money to create these rebel groups that are going to fight against power, and then they're going to, clash together, and then we get the regime we want, and we destabilize the country, create poverty, and then we rebuild it, and the rich people get rich by selling drugs and arms. So they had to figure out a way to fund this, because you can't go to Congress and go, hey, listen, I need $25 billion for our illegal drug traffic. We got to buy drugs. We got to go over there and destabilize these countries, create these rebel groups. You're never going to get the money. They had to do it covertly, right? So what was their idea? Well, they looked at what was going on in China between Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek. And when the regime in China was being attacked, they had to figure out a way to fund this group. So what they did is they created their own poppy fields. They created their own infrastructure of selling drugs, getting drug dealers, selling it to the people of China and wherever else in Asia there they could, drugging their population, getting money to fund their war. So, Pope Pius XII, being a pious lover of God, as well as the CIA guys, Wild Bill Donovan, and a couple others, looking out for the interests of the American people, what they decide to do is copy that. And so begins Burma. Burma becomes they found a place where they could start selling. They could start, making a lot of money. So they create these poppy fields, and heroin starts flowing from Burma. It's a cash cow, funding everything. They're making millions and millions of dollars. Now the money's coming into, even during the hippie movement, the money's flowing, drugs are flowing. They're controlling it with the CIA. The Vatican, where does the money have to go? Somebody's got to figure where this money is, i.e., guess what? The Vatican Bank, the biggest money laundering operation in the world, starts taking in this money. It gets washed in there, cleaned, and then sent out all over the world. No strings attached. Nobody can touch them. And I'm telling you, the biggest money laundering, they were making billions and billions of dollars off this, drugging America, drugging the rest of the world while creating wars at the same time. And no one in the media would touch it. Oh, there were stories, if you look back a little bit, there were more stories than there are today. And that's why they had to get control of the media, so that stories like this couldn't get out. And you're going to see how one journalist was killed over this, and there's been many. So that's where it all started. But you say now, are they still in Burma? No. Guess what happened? Nature took its course. There was a drought. They started losing money, so they had to find another place. And guess where they went? Afghanistan's now the big money market. That's, our soldiers go over there, and some of them come back with these stories. Why did I go there? I thought I went over to save America for freedom. And what they were doing were guarding poppy fields so no one would come in and destroy the drug trafficking. And a couple very famous people, one a former football player, I think was killed over that by what they said was friendly fire. Because I heard he was an outstanding critic of what we were really doing in Afghanistan. So they, during this time when Burma was losing, when they weren't being able to grow their drug trade, they had to find another place. During that time they lost a lot of money, but now it's back up and running, and it's still running. And you think it's stopped? The Vatican still launders. There's other banks now that get in on it. But the more they do it now, the less you hear about it, because they have more control over the governments of the world, the people running for office. They have more control over the media, who's not going to touch this story with a 10-foot pole, and the few people that do get killed, because you cannot get into their pocketbook. Their money, the money they make on drugs and arms deals, I'm telling you, who do you think funds ISIS? Yeah, where do you think they get the money for that? And we've already documented a story where there's a Jesuit priest, Father Dall'Oglio, who's been over there for years, and the story behind him is incredible. He's a conduit. He's just like, that priest I talked about from Georgetown, who back during the time of Stalin was sent over, supposedly, to bring over food for the Bolsheviks and the starving Russians. He was there brokered with a checkbook to the Bolshevik party stating, listen, if you let Stalin in, we're going to finance you. And guess where the money came from? Western banks. And so now we got Western banks and the Jesuits funding ISIS. And do you think any of this ever gets out? And where do they get their money? They get a lot from drugs. That's why you see heroin coming into this country. And that leads us up to how I'm going to show to you doubters that if you follow this story, it will lead you into everything else that I talk about here and others that have talked about it. That is the Vatican-led New World Order, its ramifications, its tentacles, and how behind the scenes they're creating a one-world government, a one-world order, one-world religion, and they are involved in every aspect of your life. Now, a lot of people can't buy that, especially at Christmas time when you get stories like the Pope. Oh, you hear on the media today, the Pope was celebrating a midnight mass at the Vatican, and he came out and said that the world is consumed with money and power. He's telling everybody we are basically too wrapped up in money. This guy, telling me and people around the world who are, others around the world are starving, that people are too worried about money and too commercially oriented, and we forget the true meaning of Christ. I mean, this guy has taken a lot of people for fools, and there's still a lot of people who believe this garbage. Now, I don't know about these pundits, these top pundits on the left and the right in the mainstream, whether they know it and they're hiding it, or whether they can't be dumb. I think they're all Satanists. I mean, or they're just, they're making 20, that Megyn Kelly, whatever her name is, or all these people, they're making $15-20 million a year for doing a 1-hour show. And then they go around writing these goofy books. None of them have any, Bill O'Reilly thinks he's the great historian. Well, where's this story? Where's the story about, the Vatican connection to Lincoln's assassination? He does a book called Killing Lincoln. Where's the story that he does when he talks about the Revolutionary War and the possible involvement of the Jesuits and the Vatican, how they really figured out what this was, how they got France and England and everybody to fight. And it wasn't just this, tea that was thrown into Boston, harbor. It's just ridiculous. And somebody's, and this story really teaches it, drug trafficking. So we laid the foundation here, where it started, now where the poppy fields are in Afghanistan, and the real reason we're there. And then we're going to come back and talk a little bit about a book that David Yallop wrote called In God's Name, and a movie called Kill the Messenger, which happened to be about Gary Webb, a journalist who was killed over Maine, Arkansas, and other things. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit DiscountGoldandSilverTrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit DiscountGoldandSilverTrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. And like I said, we're talking about drug trafficking. And for you doubters out there, after you hear what I say this half hour, don't look into this deeper and connect the Vatican and the Jesuits to what I'm talking about, then, there's really no hope. And I know there's a lot of people who listen to my show know about this. And I'm not making that statement for you. I'm making it to those, and I get a lot of emails still from people who think it's crazy. And whether they're controlled opposition people or not, I don't care. This story is the one, I think, that can bring a lot of doubters and start researching really what's going on. Drug trafficking, ever since the Cold War, and every president has dealt, since drugs started flowing into this country and the hippie movement, et cetera, every president's declared a war on drugs, a war on drugs, a war on drugs. And every president, as time goes on, the war on drugs never is really successful. They never deal in the root cause, and none of them tell you that the government and the Vatican are involved in this. It makes them a fortune. What do you think they're going to stop it for? Every president since the Cold War has never dealt with this problem, which leads me to believe every president since the Cold War has been controlled by the Vatican Jesuit powers that be. Because they're involved in this so deep. They make so much money off of it. Just like when Burma started to really dry up, they had to find another place. And the wars continue. That's where they're funding all these terrorist groups. That's a lot where the money's coming from. It's probably coming from other places as well. Now, Obama never dealt with it. Trump made a big deal in the election. One of his biggest one of his biggest campaign promises was, I'm going to stop the drugs flowing into our country. I'm going to build a big wall, and we're going to stop it. Oh, really? And he kind of said, my thought was, where is it coming from? Is he going to say what I just said? He didn't. Now, what did he say? He said, well, it's these cartels, blaming it on these cartels and these drug dealers. But who funds these drug dealers? Is the government involved? Yes. The CIA? Yes. The Vatican? Yes. Did he mention that? No. Is it going to end? No. No matter what he says. Unless he dealt with that, he's got to be on the same team as the other presidents. And it's just another way. In fact, he made a big deal. He said I was in New Hampshire, and that heroin's the biggest killer, and New Hampshire's really being infected in other places in the world, in other places in the country. But he never got to the point of where, if it was really a truthful election, this subject would have been dealt with the way David Yallop did and the way others have in the past, pinning the tail right on the Vatican cash cow and the CIA cash cow to fund all their wars and to create these arms struggles where they make billions and billions and trillions on arms deals. And people are getting killed all over the world. 500,000 Syrians. And do we hear? Yeah, we hear about it every now and then. But anyway, let's go back and look what David Yallop wrote. He wrote a book called In God's Name. And I remember it well because when this book came out, I remember I was in Italy. And I saw this firsthand. I was there for 7 years during the 80s, 6.5 years during the 80s. And he wrote a book called In God's Name. And in the book, it clearly documents most of the illegal drug money made in the U.S. and abroad ends up in the Vatican Bank. I know that for a fact. I was there. I listened to the stories in the French papers, the Italian papers that never get over here. In fact, I even tried to write a couple, and guess what? They'd never get published. The editor once said to me, he said, hey, why don't you go do I'm going to send you to Yugoslavia to do a story here. They didn't want me around Rome for a while. Or Switzerland, And I'm doing these crazy stories, and you got to eat, right? So I started thinking, why can't I cover the Vatican drug stories here? Well, Yallop showed there seemed to be a connection between the Vatican, the P2 Masonic Lodge. We talked about this, and I've talked about P2. The Jesuits wrote the 33 Scottish Rite Masonic degrees, as well as the Memphis Mizraim Masonic degrees. And line the Mafia and the Mafia works together in relation to the international drug trafficking. Look, I saw it firsthand, and I'll tell you, they were testing out terrorism when I was in Italy back then in the 80s. You know the story. Just Google Rome newspaper bombed 1982. Go down, you'll find my name. I was almost killed in that bombing. And then I find out afterwards, I was really shook up. I said, wow, who did this? It had to be an inside job. Nobody gets in here. And I found out the newspaper was owned by the CIA. So what do you think was going on? They were funding the Red Brigade and all these groups. So you can thank Reagan. Everybody said, Reagan, he's going to stop the war on drugs. Reagan knew exactly where it's coming from. And if he opened his mouth, he'd have been killed. He almost was. I don't know whether that was staged or what, but maybe he was going to say something and they had to give him a warning. Who knows? But this below quote from an online encyclopedia supports Yallop's claims. Now look at this one. I haven't heard of this. Well, this is 73, so I got in there in about 80, so let's see what happened in Rome then. And on the 26th of April, 1973, Bishop Marcinkus of the Vatican, he was also the Vatican Bank president, was questioned by William Lynch, head of the Organized Crime and Racketeering Section of the Department of Justice of the United States, and William Ehrenwald, deputy head of the strike force of the South District of New York, about a case of money laundering, money and bonds false that departed from the New York Mafia and landed in the Vatican Bank for a total of $950 million. Investigations were followed by some arrests, but of course Marcinkus was acquitted. for lack of evidence. That was there to cover it up, probably, getting the Department of Justice involved. This information makes a lot of sense because the CIA has been controlled by the Vatican and Jesuits through the Knights of Malta since the beginning. It should be noted the Knights of Malta are a Vatican military order, like I've said many times, who serve the Vatican and Jesuit order. Now, William Wild Bill Donovan, was a United States lawyer, intelligence officer, and diplomat. Donovan is best remembered as the wartime head of the OSS, a precursor to the CIA during World War II. He's known as the father of American intelligence and the father of Central Intelligence. He was a Knight of Malta, a Vatican papal knighthood submitted to the Jesuit order. They're controlled by the Jesuits. Now, if you look at the CIA involvement, it's been documented as drug dealers how the CIA is controlled by the Vatican and the Jesuits. Then it's logical to observe how the Jesuits are in control of the worldwide illegal drug dealing market. You can come to no other conclusion, can you? And I just told you the beginnings of this when it started to fund their rebel groups during the Cold War against communism. Now, a gentleman provided this to me from a website called Reptilian Dimension. But it's actually not a bad little site. I'm certain on this story. I don't know much else. I got it sent to me. But he said, the Vatican officials who directed CIA drug operations for the Jesuits. William Joseph Casey, May 13, 1913 to 1987, was a director of Central Intelligence from 1981 to 87. In this capacity, he oversaw the entire United States intelligence community and personally directed the CIA. He was Knight of Malta, submitted to the Vatican and the Jesuit order. Now we got John Alexander McCone. He died in 1991, was an American businessman and politician who served as director of the CIA during the height of the Cold War. He was also a Knight of Malta under the submission of the Vatican and Jesuits. Alan Welsh Dulles, I think one of his relatives is a Jesuit priest at Fordham. He died in 1969, was an American diplomat and lawyer who became the first civilian director of the CIA and the longest-serving director to the date. Dulles was also the uncle to a Jesuit priest named Avery Dulles. The Jesuits, folks, control the military and intelligence agencies of the world through the Knights of Malta and other secret orders, and are responsible for the nasty street drugs being distributed in our communities. There was a recent story, just appeared, folks, on December 20th. I don't have it in front of me. This was in The Guardian, I believe, that a Vatican cardinal, he gave his car to a couple people, and they said it was supposedly to go get it washed. Well, these guys ended up in another foreign country, and they were caught coming back, and he figured they had this, the Vatican has this diplomatic immunity license plates. So they were bringing back 9 pounds of cocaine in this cardinal's car. Now, the story says that the cardinal, he was 90 years old, and these guys stole his car. Now, the question becomes here, why wasn't it reported in the story? If you're going to get the car washed and it doesn't come back and they end up in another foreign country in Europe to bring back 9 pounds of cocaine to the Vatican, did anybody report the car stolen? What's the testimony of these two kids? They could tell you the truth and they're going to be made out as liars or they'll be killed. But I find it kind of suspicious that 9 pounds of cocaine coming back to the Vatican in this car and they didn't have any connection in it. That just happened a few days ago, December 20th. The story appeared in The Guardian. These Jesuits, listen, they're masters at this. This is a part of a Jesuit secret oath. They will kill heretics, curse them. They're masters of poisoning people. What about Father Alberto Rivera, the Jesuit priest who wanted to tell the truth? Now, we know that the Jesuit oath, it encourages people to poison those who don't submit to the Pope. The Vatican Council of Trent also pronounces a number of curses upon Protestants who believe in salvation through Jesus alone. Now, former mafia boss. Remember when I interviewed Tony Gambino on my radio show? He wasn't the top boss. He was one of the underbosses. He spent many years in jail. He said the mafia is working together with the Vatican and Jesuit order. And when I said, who's worse, the government or the mafia or the Vatican, he said the Vatican's the worst. Okay, the Vatican and Jesuits control CIA through Knights of Malta, right? These are clean-cut looking Roman Catholics who work for the Jesuits in positions of power. I mean, in God's name, Yallop clearly proves mafia and organized crime drug money ends up in the Vatican Bank. The Jesuit drug trade profits, allows the Jesuits to maintain control over all these groups we talk about. Yallop also proved that much of the mafia drug money that ended up in the Vatican Bank was used to purchase weapons for political parties in South America, just like I said. It seems the Vatican uses the Knights of Malta in the CIA to control governments by funding, what did they fund? The Contra Army, and they also use their actual Vatican Bank to send funds to sympathetic governments who will obey the Jesuit order then. They bribe them. They also are funding ISIS right to this day with the same kind of money. The Vatican and CIA are one entity. They always have been, and they always will be. But our presidents don't talk about that. So that's why I tell you, if Trump or Obama or Bush start saying we're going to stop the drug trade, why has not any one of these people really got to the bottom of where it comes from? Because they work with them. The CIA is as corrupt as hell. Now, they'll always keep you moving with other scandals. There's so many little scandals going on, but really behind the scenes, they're making a fortune off this. Just remember this. The CIA is a Jesuit and Vatican engine used to increase their control over the world, and it's another way they're bringing the Inquisition to the Protestants and to people around the world. And unless we wake up to this, they will succeed. Okay? So where we're at, we got about 10 minutes. But that book, In God's Name, was pretty good. So now, look, there's a guy, Gary Webb. He was an investigative journalist, and he also clearly proved that the CIA was bringing cocaine to the United States and selling it, and that the money made these drug sales was being used to fund the CIA-controlled Contra Army in Nicaragua. Remember that scheme? That's their patented plan. They're doing it today. Guess what? There's a book out, a movie. I saw it. It was called Kill the Messenger. It's based on Webb's life and how he was killed. The official report is, and he worked for the San Jose paper. I mean, he wasn't working for the New York Times because he'd had never been able to get that far. And he got run through the ringer too and fired from the San Jose paper when the government came down to the editors there and said, stop this guy. Finally, the official story was he committed suicide with 2 gunshot wounds to the head. 2. That's a good one. Now, after, he never gave up. In fact, I was a little shocked this movie got made. But it didn't. The movie never got to the Vatican on this. See that I figured they probably, everybody knows we can brush off a CIA scandal, but can we brush off? They never got to the Vatican. But I guess Webb proved if you're persistent and don't give up, people will eventually get at least part of the message. But I haven't seen many since then. All I see are these internet sites. And, they can brush that off and go, oh, these people are all conspiracy theorists. But after Webb exposed this drug operation, he was threatened by government officials, and he even eventually, like I said, was killed, assassinated. And it was made to look like a suicide. Now, there was an investigator and police officer, Rupert was his name, also exposed much of the CIA drug operation in the U.S., and was shot at his it was shot at and lost his job as a police officer for exposing it. He appeared on American TV channel C-SPAN, where he confronted political officials and CIA director about their operation. Now, I don't know who this guy. I've heard of Mike Rupert a lot of times. A lot of times I think maybe he was there for another reason, but I can't be sure. He already became too big and they couldn't kill him. Now, former Los Angeles drug dealer Rick Ross. This is Ricky Ross. We've talked about him before. Ricky Ross also wrote a book about the CIA drug operation. And Ricky Ross then explained how he eventually discovered that he was selling drugs for the CIA. And he was this guy they made rich. I mean, this guy was doing millions of dollars a day. And much of the information, he was then put in jail. And much of the information is portrayed in Kill the Messenger. Facts discussed in Kill the Messenger movie are also documented as accurate by former police officers, drug dealers, and investigators. Now, I've had Jim Rothstein on the show, and he's verified a lot of the connections. And he was let go, or almost, they were going to kill him. That was also involving the pedophilia rings. Now, the CIA, this stuff is documented as fact, okay? Now, why then I'm talking about today? So what I'm saying is, if you listen to one of Trump's major campaign themes, and that's to end the drug trafficking coming in, I don't think it'll ever happen. And if he was serious, excuse me, all this stuff would have been mentioned. But that just tells me they all work together. Now, let's go back to April 17th. The Reagan administration released a 3-page report admitting Contra cocaine connections in 1984 and 85. But you see, all this never does the Vatican come up in these reports. But we're showing, if we can make the connection through Yallop and others that the CIA and the Vatican work together. But former DIA agent Celerino Castillo alleged that during the 80s, this airport in El Salvador was used by the Contras. And I remember Castillo during the time I was on another radio station. I believe I talked to him. Yeah, goes back so far. By Contras for drug smuggling flights with knowledge and complicity of the CIA. So it goes on and on and on. And the connections, folks, have to be made, but they seemingly aren't. And that's what tells me that we're in big trouble. Even now, where people have been, like I said, the Jesuits are throwing everybody a bone now. They're throwing them a bone saying, oh, okay, we're stopping the New World Order. People are getting smart. Look at what's happening in Europe all over, these political movements. But I believe they're all controlled by them for a reason. And that's going to be interesting to see what happens in the future. Now, what I said was, if the reason I brought this up, drug trafficking, is that, well, not only does it ruin a lot of lives, and, it dumbs down a lot of people, and these people make fortunes over it. They need money to fund ISIS right now. They need money to fund all these terrorist groups. And they're doing the same thing they did when they started this back during the Cold War time, when Pope Pius XII and the CIA director, Wild Bill Donovan, and a couple others, sat down and figured out this way to do it. And what better way? Look, when you go and you do stories like I did during the 80s, and see this money going into Vatican banks, and watching all the scandals. Look, we talked about 73 in Marcinkus here, but what about when he was indicted during the scandal that I was there for, the Vatican bank scandal? What about 3 points? He was indicted for bank fraud, and it was under suspicion of murder of killing a bank president from the Bank of Ambrosiano. Now, he was airlifted out of the Vatican by the CIA, sent to a monastery in Phoenix where he lived his life out. Now, don't you think there's a connection there between these organizations? The Italian government was paid off $250,000. He was never prosecuted. Years later, they were still the son of Roberto Calvi, the bank president who was involved in this scandal, who probably was going to spill the beans and they had to kill him. He was found hanging under the Blackfriars Bridge in London. And of course they called it a suicide. He was murdered, and Marcinkus was involved in it. So years later, the son, they reopened the case, and they sent journalists here, and they sent the case of the prosecutors. You know, they were trying to open this case against Marcinkus again for murder. He was living up in a monastery. You know, he's living in a diocese in Phoenix. At the same time, I was reliving stories like this, and I got contacted by his godson, and I wanted to get an interview with him. And he said, yes, he's an old man right now, and he was just a patsy. He never did the things he said. And I said, well, okay, let me interview him. Well, this is at the time they were reinstigating this case in Rome on the murder of Calvi, you know, connected to the P2 Lodge, all the stuff going on there. The cardinals connected to the P2 Lodge and actually outed as members of the Masonic lodges. Guess what? 10 days after I remember after I asked for that interview and these journalists were coming down to interview him, he was found peacefully dead in his, at the diocese, supposedly of a heart attack, died peacefully. And not a word after that was heard. You didn't hear a big ceremony, big funeral, nothing. So I think when it got hot, the story got hot, they might have been worried he was getting old. He may spill the beans, wants to clear his conscience. And, or he may have just died of natural causes. That's an interesting story. Hey, we'll be back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal. Have a good evening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.